Design is everything. Do you want to find out why design is everything? Well, tune in every Wednesday evening at 6 and listen to the Design Authority. We will discuss products, business, education, retail, and many more aspects of design. That's the Design Authority with me, Dave Nemeth, every Wednesday at 6 p.m. right here on Radio Today, 1485 AM and DSTV channel 869.
The Design Authority every Wednesday at 6 p.m.
Design is everything. Thank you for tuning in. It's Wednesday evening and it's the Design Authority with myself, Dave Nemeth. And we have a very informative show for you this evening. If you are in business or if you are managing a team of salespeople, we're going to cover everything on how to get your business out there. We all know things have changed. We all know that we're living in an age of disruption. And I'm hoping by the end of tonight, with the amazing guest that I have in studio, that you will have new and fresh ideas on how to approach this. We're going to be discussing the art of presenting and the importance of being able to present well. So first and foremost, welcome to the show again. You're quite a regular now.
Thank you, Dave. I love being here. You're welcome to invite me back next week.
We certainly will, because I'm sure we won't get through everything, but we will certainly look at having you back down the line, because as you said to me before the show, you're doing some very interesting things at the moment. And I'd just like to remind you, if you are listening to us or you have friends that aren't sure how to tune in, that we are on DSTV channel 869. And if you want to listen to us on the go, you can simply download the TuneIn app, which is available across all the Apple platforms and Android platforms. So as I said, welcome. Good to have you back.
Thank you so much.
What I'd like to do is, last week we concentrated quite a bit on sales and we went into quite a bit of detail. But I'd like for you to give us a little bit of a recap of the important things in sales. So let's do a bit of a recap of sort of bullet pointed what we discussed last week as a sort of summary, and then we'll go through some of the key aspects that people must remember.
So are we speaking business to business sales now or business to consumer sales?
Is there going to be a big difference in the approach?
In some ways, so let's start with business to business. Just a few bullet points for the listeners. If you're selling to a business, it's really important to identify the key pain points that the client has. So uncover what are they really struggling with. They don't care so much about the solution you're providing. They're caring about the outcome that you're providing for them.
Right.
Then it's really important to come up with a core sales strategy. So last week we spoke about who's your avatar client, who's the key people that could benefit or that are actually sitting with that problem or issue. So drawing up a list of potential prospects that you could go see.
A wish list of these are the guys I'd ideally like to have as clients, and there's a lot of research that's got to go into that. So it's not just a hit and miss.
Definitely. And then allocating it to your different salespeople. So whether it's in certain categories, certain areas that's closer to where they're living, and then to actually have some kind of a matrix which feeds into your sales funnel. So to identify how many calls they should make a day, how many appointments a week they should have, how many interactions with clients.
I think that's very important as well, because I think a lot of companies lose track of this. They don't have a proper system to say, you know what exactly did you do today?
Exactly.
Were you just driving around? Oh, I was on the phone all day. Okay, great. Who did you phone? What was the response? Why did you actually contact that person? So that you can actually monitor that there's a science to this. It's not just being done off the cuff.
A client of mine the other day, we were talking about her sales strategy, and she said she's struggling to convert her sales. And as we were discussing our next coaching session, I said to her, how is your strategy in terms of following up with clients, and how often do you follow up with them? And she said she rarely does. So if you look at the stats, only about 3% of sales gets made in the first encounter.
Right.
But almost 80% of salespeople will only contact a client twice. So if you fall in the final, 10% of salespeople that will contact clients 5 to 10 times, you will get up to 80% of the business.
Interesting. And I know that, I mean, even in my side, in my business, I've got clients that have signed up after a year and a half, 2 years.
Exactly, and that's what you call lag time. A person can be ready to buy right now in 3 weeks, 3 years, or 5 years. You don't know where they are in the process of buying. So you need to keep on educating and creating that need with them until they're ready to buy.
And obviously that's not always a phone call or an email, because people get a little bit irritated with that. It's keeping up the communication. So that can also be done with newsletters, and then the following month to phone them and say, by the way, did you receive that? What do you think of that? So you're not forcing sales, you're just trying to remain top of mind.
Definitely. Even sharing something like this, a podcast of yours, Dave, would definitely help interacting with your clients, giving them valuable information to sign on more business for your company.
Okay, so it's a science, and there needs to be a proper strategy to it.
Definitely.
Salespeople need to be proactive in trying to find that wish list.
Definitely, and what we also discussed last week is that sales also becomes a large management leadership function, actually figuring out what is your strategy going to be in terms of whether you're having a presentation. What do your salespeople say over the phone? What is the educational value you're bringing to the clients? So don't just allow the salespeople to figure it out on their own. It has to be a holistic approach together, maybe workshop-based, where you actually decide as a group what you're going to be focusing on. Maybe there's some campaigns or educational value that you can actually go and bring your clients. It's not just the salesperson's responsibility to figure that out on their own.
Okay, another question I have, which we actually didn't speak about last week, but it's just come to mind, is often big companies, they give their salespeople regions, because that's probably the easiest way to handle it. So someone's got this region, someone's got that region. But not everybody is compatible with certain businesses. So maybe management also need to look at the compatibility of people with companies and actually match them up that way. Do you find that that is something that needs to be addressed as well?
Definitely, you could actually look at different categories according to their interests and what they're really passionate about, and maybe even have it on a rotational basis to see if a person's maybe trying out the car industry or another person's trying out a different one, which of those industries relates better to a specific salesperson. So that's where your reviews and customer surveys come in handy to actually almost match the company and the industry to the salesperson. But that's really why salespeople need to be at a company for a longer period of time to actually find their sweet spot and their niche with their clients as well.
I was also going to say to you, surely regardless of how good the salespeople are, because things are constantly changing, there has to be training all the time.
All the time.
And I think very few companies do that. They got, these are our top salespeople, these ones aren't performing, but they don't know why they're not performing, and there's not, things are changing.
I was at a presentation the other day, and they spoke about the fourth industrial revolution and how things are changing so much. So if salespeople and companies are not actually going to keep top of mind and actually bringing new solutions and new learning to clients, they will also fall by the wayside. So it has to be a constant process. So even if your company is not offering you training, I have had sales managers, sales directors contacting me where they would pay out of their own pockets and invest in their own training and coaching, even if their company didn't have budget. So don't just wait for your company to make budget available. You could even make use of professional services yourself, and in that way persuade your company to make the investment.
Well, I think that's the thing. If you want to be the top salesperson and your company is still growing and they don't necessarily have that kind of finances, it's up to you to better yourself.
And you're really writing your own paycheck through your commissions, so should you not actually be using a portion of that for ongoing learning?
I couldn't agree more. Any other basics? There's a plan that's needed. Research who you're trying to target. Have a plan from management level. Continually train your staff.
We spoke about your personal brand. So pay attention to what's happening on social media, all of your images on the various platforms? What is the core message that you want to convey? And how do you actually interact with clients, whether it's over LinkedIn, Facebook, any of those platforms?
Correct. And I think for companies, make sure that you have sort of an SLA or some sort of agreement with staff, some document that makes sure they handle themselves in a professional manner. Because the moment they walk out of that door, that person's going to go onto LinkedIn and Facebook and look at that person.
So on Friday, I was doing that event that I told you about last week for SME Warrior, and there was a core focus on sales. And one of the things that we focus on that can be really beneficial is building case studies that showcases that you have the credibility and that you've done the work in the past. So what I made the business owners do is actually find examples where a client had a huge issue. So I was speaking in Game of Thrones methodology. So
Okay.
what
You
is the
mentioned that
winter?
last week,
Yeah,
yes.
what's the winter that's coming? If you don't deal with the winter, what's going to happen? The White Walkers is going to come around and kill everyone. And then your solution is finding the dragon glass that can slay the White Walkers so that they can be live. So if a client can look at it, what is the winter that's coming? What if you don't deal with this winter? What is that White Walker? What is that White Walker going to cause to happen? So not dealing with the issue. What are the greater repercussions of not dealing with it? How much is it costing that company? And then how have you solved this for other people? And what was the return of investment? If you can map it out in that way, it will open many doors. So that's just in a snapshot.
Tell me something else as well, because a lot of companies that I speak to at the moment are really battling to find good quality sales staff. They have these interviews and person looks amazing. 3 months down the line, nothing happens. How should you be interviewing and how should you be looking for salespeople?
So specifically in your interviews, you need to give them tests to do and role plays. So actually looking at what kind of hard skills do they need, what kind of soft skills do they need. So if they need to be making phone calls, so if it's a call center environment, you need to actually give them a test where they put in a room and they have to make a physical phone call to you in the other room, and where you're trying out different objections and things like that. If it's a person that actually has to do business-to-business sales, can they prepare something? So maybe come with a product that they solved in the past. Can you maybe give them some information on your product or service? Give them maybe 10 minutes to prepare. Give them a scenario and tell them to sell. So you're putting them under fire and then you're actually reviewing them. So you're actually looking at their actual sales ability under fire. So there you could look at things like their confidence, their presentation manner, how quickly can they think on their feet, deal with objections, kind of like the soft skills. How did they build rapport? Did they have any kind of structure in the sale, or did they just immediately go and sell you something versus first uncovering the need, building a relationship, coming with some educational viewpoints versus just pushing a product on your throat?
Sure, like a second-hand car salesman in the past. That game has also changed drastically. And I've come across some insanely good car salesmen in the past couple of years. I mean, in the past it was a totally different game. So they still use that analogy, but even that game has changed. Would you have to look for somebody that's been in the same industry? So you're selling copiers. Would you, traditionally you'd go and try a headhunt or somebody that was selling copiers. But I mean, the industry for salespeople is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. It's not like it was 20 years ago. What is the risk of getting somebody in that has sold a completely different product?
I think sales is a transferable skill.
Right.
And if it's in the same level of, let's almost say, intellectual industry, if the company gives you thorough research and training on that industry to really understand it, and you can shadow a bit, and they have a solid sales process and maybe educational material and all of that, you can very easily transition into selling something else. But sometimes the learning curve can be a little bit steep That's why you need to have set training on that industry, on the products, go out with current salespeople, be face of the objections, all of that. But if someone is really very professional and they have a solid way of selling, building rapport, they're more consultative, and they really buy into your product or service, if they really believe in what you have to sell, that it can be beneficial to the target audience, they can sell that. I really believe that.
What about managing your time? Because I know some of the complaints as well, and it's great to build relationships, and I think that's very important for every single salesperson. But a lot of salespeople get very comfortable, especially if they've got high basics, seeing the same customers regularly, and it becomes a 2-hour chat over coffee. The sales aren't there, but there's this great relationship. Or it's a B2B where it's an order placing function. The client is placing orders, so they're seeing the clients. How important is it that time is monitored and the salespeople themselves actually manage their time properly?
When a salesperson looks at planning their meetings, maybe there needs to be a proper structure in place where they give planning back to management to say, what is the intention of this meeting? Is this to build relationship? Is this to upsell? Is this looking at implementing more different campaigns? What is your intention of going to this meeting? So that should it be more of a relationship building exercise, they need to limit their time, versus where they are also going to be doing product selling and so forth. Something that I found in another industry, and I'm not going to give too much detail because there's inside info I can't give.
Sure.
But in this specific industry, the salespeople were mostly just doing account management, and people were simply just seeing them as drinking tea and coffee or taking their clients for drinks. And what ended up happening is the more technical people in the company ended up having more and more work dumped on them, where they were doing all the proposals because the salespeople supposedly didn't have the knowledge. So my feedback to that client was, should you not be educating the sales department on a technical level so that they can be dealing with the clients, and then when they do the specifications, they can actually bring the technical person that will be doing the work in for final specifications on an agile approach.
Right.
But where their approach was purely sales is a tea and coffee game, and not actually allowing the salespeople to do the work to finally get the deal closed, leaving it on other departments. So you need to have a very clear focus on what's the intention. Do I need to bring other experts in? How are we going to move this deal forward? Maybe actually having a nice CRM system where you're mapping in what was the intention of that meeting, could really help clients with their time management and seeing if they are actually being productive or wasting time, like you're saying.
And I think that's quite important as well, especially for the technical companies, is for that salesperson to know when do they need to bring in the expert in the company along with them, because often that's going to close the deal. And often it's important for the senior management to go along to these meetings as well. If this salesperson is dealing with the CEO or whoever it is or the managing director, you need to show face if you want to close that deal.
Definitely. And it's even using the right kind of language and speaking on a different level. So if you're selling to an end user, you would use different sales language versus speaking to a manager, speaking to a financial director or a CEO. Everyone has different needs.
Correct.
So actually figuring out, where am I, what do they need to hear that will move their business forward? Not selling from a product or service point of view, but putting yourself in the shoes of the person you're sitting with.
Excellent. Well, I think that pretty much sums up what we discussed last week. Well, I am speaking to Yoke Van Dam. Sorry, my earphones went a bit moggy there, so I wasn't quite sure if I was actually speaking to anybody. We were speaking about sales. We did a recap, and we said that a very important part of this whole process, work in general, not just sales, but communication overall, the importance of being able to present and communicate.
The power of persuasion, yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
The moment a person gets given the opportunity to get onto a stage or even at a networking event, speak, or even in a boardroom scenario, is offered the opportunity to present, everyone sees that person as the expert. So if you as a CEO or manager are shy of presenting, you are losing out on core opportunities, on upping your level of persuasion with core stakeholders in your business. So if you have the ability to present and speak well, you can actually persuade your staff to work better, you can persuade your shareholders, your shares can increase, you can, in a PR crisis situation, actually be able to deal with the media better. And I've seen quite a few lecturers on university levels say they are struggling to connect with the students in the class. So at University of Pretoria, they have 300 to 500 to 1,000 students in the class sometimes. And the lecturers are competing against the cell phones, the laptops, the tablets with all of the millennials. And they're saying if they don't get to learn how to tell stories and connect with a bigger audience and actually divert the students' attention away from their cell phones and whatever they're doing in their own minds, they're not actually going to have the impact to help them take that information and knowledge and, be on the journey with the lecturer. So there are various ways that it can actually help a person connect with the audience, but also whether it's over the phone or just in a one-on-one meeting, if you can speak better, you will do better in business.
Well, I think it goes back to even the skills we learn at school. So it's one of those things, yes, you get to do speeches, but you're not really taught communication skills at all. In fact, nowadays, millennials battle to actually speak and know how to speak on a phone, how to answer a phone, it's just one of those things because everything is texted. We just simply SMS or we email and those skills are gone. In any company, it's not just about the sales, but it's how you communicate with your colleagues. If you want to move further up the ladder, you have to be able to speak because regardless of the level, there comes a time when you're going to have to present to the board, you're going to have to present at meetings, and a lot of people just fall apart completely.
They sometimes you get people that are really shy, but then you get people that like speaking a lot, and they tend to overwhelm, and people switch off. So if you can bring your point across in a concise way, in a way that people can actually listen to it and remember it, you will have much greater success as well.
Okay, so you do this for a living.
Yes.
You speak a lot as well. Tell us about how you got into speaking. Were you always a natural speaker, or did you have to be trained, or something that you had to practice?
Many years ago, I was working at a company, Pearson Education, a publishing house, and we had to do these presentations to 300, 400, 500 lecturers at the FET colleges, and at that stage, there was huge issues with the textbooks. The new OBE curriculum was launched, and textbooks were being published and being submitted to the Department of Education. But a lot of crisis management was happening because the lecturers were waiting for their books. So we had to do these presentations for reputation management. We would get onto a stage with a microphone and all the lecturers would be shouting. So what I learned there was the value of presenting and actually addressing the problems before people have asked a question or called you out on it. Speak about the elephant in the room.
Right.
Talk about the solutions. So what Pearson did really well was sending us on a presentation skills course more than 10 years ago. And there was an incredible speaker there, Deshaun Casel. She's climbed Everest, I think, like 7 times. And next year, her and a few women are climbing it again. And I went to her during the course and said, how do you do this thing of getting into speaking? I was like, I've never had a calling, but I believe this is my calling. And she said, well, join Toastmasters. So 10 years ago, that's what I did. And throughout the years, I actually completed my Distinguished Toastmasters July last year. I went through all of the processes, did all of the leadership tracks. And what I noticed as I was learning and practicing is people started referring to me as a speaker. So all of my friends that got married through the years would say, can you do a toast at our wedding? Next thing that happened, I was the master of ceremonies. The next thing that happened, people were asking me to do corporate talks or inviting me to speak at events. So the moment you get comfortable, people start asking you because they feel comfortable. They don't feel comfortable about it, and they see that you're good at it. So I saw my reputation rise quite a bit and progress in business on a leadership level, all of that. So speaking is definitely something that you can learn and grow into. But one of my international mentors, Daryl LaCroix, he actually won the World Champs many years ago in Toastmasters, and he said, you need stage time, stage time, stage time.
I think that's the only way you're going to overcome the fear. And let's be honest, there's some very good... I've met a lot of people that can have a fantastic conversation. They're very well spoken, but don't get them on a stage. There's this fear, and they're never going to overcome that fear unless they start to practice.
Yeah, so what I did when I studied NLP and I actually developed this course on the power of persuasion is I actually brought various NLP and coaching techniques in to deal with that fear. So like various visualization ideas, a bit of circle of excellence. There's various ways that you can trick your brain to give you a confident state. So sometimes I've had even CEOs that ask me to coach them on confidence, and they're getting on stage and they're getting the butterflies in their stomach, or they're having nightmares. And I had to actually help them with the NLP process, train that or change that pattern in their brain. So in the course, I give you some of the techniques, but if you need the deep work, individual coaching session is better,
Obviously, preparation is everything as well.
Definitely. And have you watched the Lady Gaga performance of Bradley Cooper at the Oscars?
I haven't. My wife has.
You
I
have
saw
to see
snippets,
it.
but I haven't.
So an example of preparation comes in there. I saw a YouTube video of hers after she'd won the Oscar for the most original song, and she spoke about their preparation and rehearsals before the Oscars. And I found it to be so interesting. So you speak about design thinking. It was a beautiful design, the way that Bradley Cooper envisioned it. So he decided everything in terms of, so if you watch the video, look out for certain things in terms of what's happening with the lights. So Lady Gaga actually phoned the person in charge of the lighting at the Oscars to do certain things with the lighting and the audience, how they're bringing up the piano, how he actually leads her up on stage, where they're standing. So he stands across from her at the beginning. Then she goes and sits down at the piano, starts playing. Then he moves around and kind of like snuggles up next to her. It's all beautifully designed. It's a performance, and they rehearsed it thoroughly. So how well do people actually rehearse and have a performance when they go and address an audience? And very few of them actually put in that effort, as Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga, real professionals, did.
Sure, and I think that's very important, is that you got to see it as a performance. So you need to know your subject matter backwards. The days of having keynotes and pieces of paper, as far as I'm concerned, are dead and buried. I go to a lot of conferences. You don't want to see somebody with notes. You've got a monitor up, you've got a screen, your subject matter is there, you need to know it backwards. There's nothing wrong with being prompted with certain things that happen on the screen, but surely that is step number one.
Definitely, there are ways. So if you, for instance, make use of PowerPoint, there are ways to actually put a few bullet points on the back end, that if there's a way for you to actually see the screen which is positioned away from the audience,
Yes.
that you could at least see which is the next slide with a few prompts. But you need to know exactly what to say from there. So actually just having a lot of text on there that you're reading is not on. So it's like having a main image and maybe 2 or 3 main points and having a conversation around that. And that's really the style that everyone's going for at the moment. More images, much less text, and telling stories.
And we'll actually get onto that just now. We'll get onto the telling stories as well as the visual aspect of what a presentation looks like. But I'd like to take it back a step, because many people and good employees are killed in a boardroom because there's a monthly meeting and they've got to go present, for instance, their numbers or a new initiative or a new strategy. And they go in there and they rattle it all off. There's no emotion. There's no, I'm passionate about this. This is why I want it. And suddenly there's one question and they fall apart. So scenario planning, I think even at boardroom level,
Definitely
is vital. What happens if so-and-so asks me this?
So one of the things that I actually encourage people to do in the presentation bootcamp is preparing the questions that they can ask for you and asking yourself, what is the worst question that the audience can ask me? And preparing for that. So that's really your scenario planning.
Even if you've got bad numbers. So we know these numbers are bad. They're going to slaughter me basically because of this. How do I excuse it without coming up with excuses?
And is there a way to address that elephant in your presentation itself? So rather taking control yourself than waiting for them to ask the question. So if you've actually framed it in a way and already come up with solutions or explanations, it might be a completely different scenario than waiting for them to slaughter you as you're expecting.
And I think the importance is, so if you're in a company and you're aiming at getting to the top and climbing that ladder, that you start this regardless of your level. So juniors in companies should be honing in on these presentation skills because it's going to fast track their progression surely.
All levels of staff need to see themselves as leaders, whether they have that title or not, because the moment you start having a voice, your followers will come and you can actually start making a huge difference in an organization on an influential level, even if you're not in management. And as you're progressing in your career, if people have noticed your leadership skills and your speaking skills, you'll be able to progress much quicker.
I mean, you don't see CEOs or MDs that are not able to address a company, an audience, or a press conference. If you don't have those skills, it's going to be very difficult to get to that kind of level.
Some of them have come to me for help.
Well, there you go. But as an employee, the advice is start early. Get your speaking skills, get your communication skills up to scratch. If you're an employer, it's vital that you start looking at this through every single rank of your business.
Definitely. And just in terms of what does your voice sound like when you're interacting with your clients over the phone, and what kind of communication is going out towards your clients? These days, people are doing so many YouTube videos. There are such nice ways to now interact with your clients. It doesn't just have to be a newsletter anymore.
No, correct. And I think if you're just looking and discussing like we were sales just now, there's very few salespeople that have been on communication or presentation skill courses or training.
And it can escalate your sales process so much quicker. So what can happen is the moment you're actually at a trade fair or wherever and you are bringing a topic of discussion, so something that's topical in your industry, people will come to you afterwards and speak to you and ask you for advice or input versus you trying to headhunt everyone else there at the trade show. So can you do it the other way around, where people are actually coming to you?
You position yourself as an authority. Now let's get on to the actual physical aspect, because there's very few presentations without visuals. You know, they always say death by PowerPoint. PowerPoint or video or animation is never going to go away, because your audience you've still got to, they want to see a visual of what you're discussing 90% of the time. There's nothing worse than going to a conference or a presentation and they whip up these amazing charts of just writing and bullet points, and the speaker is literally speaking to every single one of those points.
People just switch off. There are obviously a few others. So Prezi is a nice one as well that I've seen. A lot of speakers use Keynote as well. And the other day I saw someone doing something interesting. It was a trainer and he just used, but it was a smaller audience, a flip chart.
Okay.
So sometimes actually using props like what Steve Jobs did. He's one of my best examples with the MacBook Air. I don't know if you saw that product launch where he was presenting and there were the slides up, and then finally you walked over to a table and there was a brown envelope and out he pulled the MacBook Air, and it was just a sense of awe and unveiling. So the fact that it was
Tactile.
so tiny and tactile brought a nice element to it.
Now tell me about this person presenting on a flip chart. Was he writing on it or was the information already on it?
It was pre-prepared.
Okay.
He just had a few key things on there, so maybe a framework, and then he discussed that. And I thought that would actually work really well on a YouTube video as well, where you're doing a mini educational to clients. So instead of doing what everyone else is doing, could you do it in a fresh and different way? So maybe if you've designed a funky poster or whatever, you could even put that on the flip chart as well. So I know one of my favorite TED Talks is Simon Sinek's Starting With Why, which was on TED, and he was using a flip chart. And that's how he actually drew the golden circle, and everyone still remembers used that video. And someone else that's great at presenting as well, does a lot of YouTube, is Brendan Burchard, the Millionaire Messenger. He uses a lot of flip chart as well. So it's like an informal way of when you're on video.
Yeah, I think it's something unique because you're putting on a show. We're going to take a quick ad break, and then we're going to talk about telling the story.
DSTV channel 869 and streaming everywhere on the TuneIn Radio app. This is 1485 Radio Today.
Thank you for tuning in to the Design Authority. And we are talking presentation skills with Yoke Van Dam, who is the CEO of a company called Y Connect. And this is a follow-on if you've just joined us from last week, where we were discussing sales and the importance of strategy. And obviously coupled with that is you've got to have great presentation skills. And we were just saying just now that regardless of your role in the company, whether you work for yourself, it doesn't matter what you do. You've got to be able to communicate, and you've got to be able to communicate well. Tell us about storytelling. It's this buzzword that's everywhere. So brands have to tell stories. You've got to tell stories on social media. Your marketing's got to tell stories. But now you're a speaker, or you're presenting at a conference, or you're presenting at a sales meeting. How do I tell stories?
So storytelling is really an age-old phenomenon, and that was the way in which history was translated for years, where people were actually sitting around those campfires, and you would have the old chief leader or grandfather conveying that story. So when you actually start telling a story, it taps a person's unconscious mind, and it makes their inner child happy, and they actually sit a bit forward. So even if you just use the word imagine, or a long time ago, or you delve into a story immediately, you've got the audience's attention. So what I've found with storytelling is I started using stories in my training, because as I was training, remember last week we spoke about training salespeople at Auto Trader, and sometimes getting frustrated because I would train them and they would forget what I trained them on, even though they've written tests and everything. So eventually I read a book, Brain Power by John Medina, who spoke specifically about storytelling. And he said if you evoke emotions in your audience, your brain releases dopamine, and it actually enhances memory. So if you're telling a story, you can allow the audience to actually remember what you've said.
Okay.
So that's really where I started changing my sales approaches adding more personal stories coupled with the theory that I was teaching and the products. And even 2-3 years later, people come up to me and say, I still remember that story and the lesson from that, or they would relate to the metaphor. And we would laugh about it, but it shows that it's stuck in their mind.
Well, that's so interesting, because I'm going to jump back to sales now. Now, for a salesperson to understand what's happening in the industry, to continually research, to find something that's applicable to the product they're selling or the service they're selling that's just an innovation or whatever it is, that can become a story without a hard sell.
Definitely. So I was referring to case studies earlier on.
Yes.
You're telling a story. You're telling them about the winter, the White Walker, what you did, and what was the solution. It actually becomes a story, and it's much more of a softer sell. But what happens is, I say you make the horse thirsty. So you're not talking product, you're talking about similar clients that you've helped that were in dire straits, and this is what happened to them, and then you came in, and then suddenly they're like, but we're sitting with the same issue, or couldn't you help us with something like that too? So you're putting the power back where the client wants it.
Okay. I'm standing on stage, I'm presenting this thing now. Also, there's nothing worse than hearing a story that you've heard at another conference, or a tagline or a joke or something that is just generic. You've got to research what you're putting out there and don't plagiarize, surely.
So the golden rule is, can you bring in more personal stories? Because if it's your personal story, you own it. You are the main character. Or one of my favorite presentation coaches, Patricia Fripp, says, don't make yourself the hero of your own story.
Yeah,
You
because
could
people
be-
don't really want to hear about you
No.
unless you're a motivational speaker that's climbed Kilimanjaro or something like that. Then they want to hear about you.
So can you talk about what your mentor taught you? Can you talk about the failings that you've had, where you were, and how you improved? So I love the interview style of Nadine Todd at Entrepreneur Magazine, and I was at this We Are SME event a while ago, and she interviewed one of the CEOs of the Burgers Rocamamas.
Yes.
And in all of her feature articles, the focus was not just on, oh, you're so great. It was, what failures have you had in your life? It was actually delving into the things that got them to where they are now. It wasn't looking at how is their home looking like, what cars are they driving. It wasn't a lifestyle focus like you would have on Top Billing. It was so that the readers could actually relate to the hardships they had, the grit they had to have, the determination, the lessons they had to learn to be able to become successful. And that's what people can relate to. Your failings, the hard things. If you're willing to, like Brene Brown says, if you're willing to be vulnerable and lower your walls, that's where people buy into you.
That's where the connection is. That's the authenticity.
Definitely.
I'm listening to a real person. I'm not listening to this robot. Visuals to accompany that, because obviously if you've got great visuals as well when you prepare your presentations, it can also be remembered.
So can you make sure that that the images you're using doesn't have copyright? So are you just grabbing them from Google Images, and does it have like stock photo written all over that?
I've seen that a million times.
It's terrible. So a lot of people have never been taught this, and that's something we also train on in this course, is what are some of the free sites where you can get free images that will be in high quality? Or should you actually, as a business, be investing in some stock photos that will be original so that your presentation doesn't look like all of the other companies that are using the free stock photos?
Or alternatively, invest in those presentations and get an outside company that specializes in that to put the production together for you.
Definitely.
Because that is going to make or break you, especially if you're a big company presenting. There's you can't do great stuff in-house because you don't have that sort of capability.
And it's going to, in the long run, save you a lot on your reputation. You're going to have a much greater impact by making that investment, and you're going to have much greater results. So you're seeing a lot of keynote speakers that even have mini show reels, videos at the start that's pulling people into the presentation as well. Most companies cannot do that themselves, or it will be very low quality. So that's where you actually bring the experts like yourself on board to do that.
Another thing is getting to ease and feeling confident, and that goes with part of the preparation, is you arrive at the venue. Now, I've seen speakers rush in, scramble, and their audio doesn't work, this doesn't work. What advice do you have, number one, for the amount of backups that you take with you, and checking equipment before you even get started?
I'll give you some ideas. Last year I was as a speaker at the Disrupt HR, which was a massive audience, 300 to 500 at the Barnyard Rivonia, on a huge stage, being mic'd up, all of that. And the format there is your slides go on rotate every, I think, 15 seconds, a new slide comes on. So you need to be so super prepared. You don't have any access to clicking or anything like that. And you had to actually provide the slides beforehand. One of the things that happened there is, can you find out if you're part of a slide deck? So let's say there's a few presenters. What is the size of the screen? Would they prefer you to have the narrow standard size or the bigger size slide design? So I've done sometimes trainings with different training providers where I did my slides and I didn't check beforehand on what format theirs would be. And
it doesn't fill the screen.
I had to redesign my entire deck. It took me hours to make them fit together. So that's just one of the factors, which is more on a design level long before you get there. So can you make sure that, for instance, what kind of cables will they have?
Yeah, especially if you've got a Mac. If you've got a Mac, you're going to need those adapters. The sound guys will not have them, I can guarantee you.
Can you have a backup on maybe a memory stick? Can you even save your presentation in the cloud on a Google Drive or somewhere that you could access should something bad happen?
I think the safest is, and I work on a Mac, so everything I do is in Keynote.
Brilliant.
Is always save it out as a PowerPoint presentation as well, because if something goes wrong, 90% of these conferences will have PowerPoint, they won't have Keynote. If you're working on Keynote, make sure that you've arranged beforehand that you have your laptop in front of you.
Definitely. Another speaker recommends, should you be using your own computer, that you already have opened your presentation in the correct way, so that if you're giving your laptop, because he prefers doing that, if you're giving that to the person that's connecting it, that they don't connect it and now they're seeing your photo where you were on the beach with someone and all of your folders on your desktop. So make it so professional that it's literally open, it's already opened up in the correct place, that it can just start playing. So something else that people could look at getting is a clicker. So there are various devices available.
Some very expensive ones, which are great.
But looking at, is the stage going to be so big that I need a larger range?
Yes.
So some clickers won't even carry over that long distance. So you really need to look at all of that. Things that I've had to do for presentations is go there beforehand and check the venue setup. If you're happy with, if they are actually packing out the chairs, could you send them a design in the way that you want it? Or could you otherwise go early and change it if you're unhappy with it? Because you as the speaker or presenter, you want to have a certain feel or vibe for the venue. And that energy, the way that it's designed, will have a huge impact on how you'll feel towards the audience and your connection with them.
Absolutely. And also make sure that you have some or other device with you that is reminding you, or that you can see how much time you have left and how many slides you've got to go, because there's nothing worse than a speaker that just rambles on way past and makes everybody else late. You look completely unprofessional.
Last thing that I want to add is have a backup, so that should the electricity completely be cut out, as we know that happens,
A lot.
that you either make a mind map or something so that should you have an hour keynote, you just have your main opening, close, and core points that you could maybe put on a table or something that you can just casually walk over and glance, and that won't hinder the audience at all. But that's just your backup so that you are not reliant on the slides, which might not even be there.
Yeah, you might just have to go for it. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Very, very insightful. And the importance of this is just paramount, regardless if you're an employee or an employer. We've run out of time. Thank you for listening. Yoke, how do we get hold of you? How do our listeners out there get hold of you?
They can call me at 060-928-5961, or they can go to my website at y-connect.biz. y-connect.biz.
Thank you so much for coming in. I hope you, the listener, enjoyed that as much as I did. I hope you'll join me next week again, same time between 6 and 7 for the Design Authority right here on Radio Today. Thank you for listening. Design is everything. Do you want to find out why design is everything? Well, tune in every Wednesday evening at 6 and listen to the Design Authority. We will discuss products, business, education, retail, and many more aspects of design. That's the Design Authority with me, Dave Nemeth, every Wednesday at 6 p.m. right here on Radio Today, 1485 AM and DSTV channel 869.
The Design Authority every Wednesday at 6 p.m.
Design is everything. Design is everything. Design is everything.